Today, the world watched a tense and consequential move in the Persian Gulf unfold into open confrontation and a show of force that could shape markets and diplomacy for weeks to come. President Donald J. Trump announced a new U.S.-led initiative this weekend to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for commercial shipping, calling the operation Project Freedom. The president described it as a humanitarian effort to free ships and crews trapped in a waterway that carries roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil. The announcement, made on May 3rd, 2026, set in motion a Central Command operation that began supporting escorted transits the following day. U.S. supporting escorted transits the following day. U.S. at the Central Command, under the leadership of Admiral Brad Cooper, mobilized a substantial force to back the operation, guided missile destroyers, more than 100 air and sea aircraft, multi-domain unmanned platforms, and roughly 15,000 service members. The stated mission is narrowly framed to restore freedom of navigation for merchant vessel and to shepherd neutral ships safely through a corridor that had been effectively choked by months of Iranian sea denial tactics and reported minefields. Admiral Brad Cooper said have successfully transit to the Strait of Hormuz and Arsili Hijid on their journey. Times within hours of that effort beginning, the situation deteriorated. The United Arab Emirates reported an Iranian strike, saying 4 cruise missiles were launched toward Emirati territory, 3 were intercepted and destroyed, and a 4th fell into the water. Authorities in Fujairah, a Gulf emirate that sits on a key oil export route, said an Iranian drone struck an oil facility and caused a fire. Officials on the ground reported damage and at least a handful of injuries. A South Korean-flagged cargo ship also suffered an engine room fire while transiting the Strait. South Korean investigators announced they were probing whether the blaze was the result of undead. Emmy Action, Iranian state media, meanwhile, put forward a different account. Some outlets claim the Revolutionary Guard had struck a U.S. warship with missiles, a claim that U.S. Central Command swiftly rejected. CENTCOM said no, U.S. Central Command swiftly rejected. Warships were struck. The commander-in-chief of Iran's army pushed back in stark terms on social channels and in state statements. He said, asterisk every inch of these waters is within the range of our will. The American aircraft carriers, the radar, SIOL, sees imagine they can approach the Strait of Hormuz, but our response was to fire Screes, missiles, and COMP-D drones. Initiative. On the U.S. side, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, speaking in the morning's coverage of the unfolding events, framed the American posture in blunt economic and strategic terms. He said, asterisk, we were saying that the Iranians do not have control of the Strait. We have control of the Strait. WE have blockaded the ships going into or out of Iranian parts. The economy is in free fall, and everyone says they have a high tolerance for pain. Their soldiers will not have a high tolerance for not getting paid. Those are strong words from a cabinet official, and they reflect a broader U.S. approach that blends military pressure with economic leverage. The administration's messaging is clear. It will use naval power to reopen international waterways while retaining the option of punitive measures to deter interference on the ground in the Gulf. The immediate sequence of events was chaotic. Reports came in of ballistic missile launches, drone strikes, and small boat harassment. The UAE Defense Ministry said it had intercepted missiles over its waters. CENTCOM said American forces intercepted missiles and destroyed at least 6 small Iranian vessels that had threatened merchant traffic in the shipping lane. Naval radar tracks, social media footage, and multiple official statements showed a high-tempo maritime environment. Merchant ships at anchor, warships maneuvering, and unmanned net aircraft sweeping sea lanes for crews aboard trapped merchant ships. The situation is more than geopolitical theater. Many vessels and their multinational crews have been at anchor for weeks, running short of provisions and unable to safely continue. That practical reality, seafarers hungry, fuel and supplies limited. Contracts under strain was a core element of the White House justification for an intervention framed as humanitarian. But Project Freedom is not without battlefield risk. Iran has repeatedly warned it will not tolerate what it calls foreign interference in its perceived territorial waters or attempts to break the blockade it has imposed at sea. Tehran's leaders carved the line clearly. Foreign warships venturing into or too near the strait will be treated as threats. That posture has produced tit-for-tat strikes, and today's actions mark one of the clearest and most dangerous escalations since the fragile ceasefire that had briefly reduced violence in early April. On the diplomatic front, the U.S. move has produced mixed reactions among partners. Some of Washington's traditional allies applauded the stated goal of reopening a vital artery for global trade. Others warned against unilateral action without a multilateral mandate. Western capitals are watching oil markets and shipping insurers closely. Any sustained disruption in the Strait pushes energy prices higher, strains supply chains, and ripples through economies already coping with inflationary pressures. back in Washington. The White House described Project Freedom as a balance of military readiness and diplomatic pressure. Senior officials said the operation would include information sharing with allied governments and invited neutral nations to liaise with U.S. planners if they wanted help moving their flagged vessels. At the same time, the U.S. continues to assert a naval blockade against Iranian ports as part of a broader campaign to cut off Iran's revenue streams and compel a return to meaningful negotiations. On the Iranian side, leaders framed the U.S. initiative as provocation. State media depicted Project Freedom as a breach of the ceasefire and a direct challenge to Iranian sovereignty in the Gulf. Iran's military spokespeople described missile salvos and drone strikes as warnings intended to keep foreign warships at a distance. In the immediate hours of today's confrontations, CENTCOM officials briefed reporters. They defended U.S. force posture as defensive, saying American ships and aircraft have responded to immediate threats to commercial shipping and U.S. forces. The command emphasized efforts to avoid a spiral into all-out war while signaling a readiness to act decisively if American lives or vessels were threatened. For the United Arab Emirates, which is a key U.S. partner in the region, the attacks brought the war home. Commercial centers and oil infrastructure are among the assets the UAE has worked for decades to protect damage to that. Infrastructure risks long recovery timelines and economic aftershocks. Gulf Cooperation Council states, meanwhile, have been scrambling to coordinate security measures, keep airspace safe, and reassure foreign investors and shipping interests. At sea, merchant captains reported confusion as mines care protocols and the threat of drones forced ships to alter course or wait for naval guidance. Insurance underwriters raised premiums, and some carriers signaled they would reroute or suspend transits until clearer protections were in place. Oil traders reacted swiftly. Prices jumped as market participants priced in the risk of prolonged disruption in seaborne crude flows. The human side of today's events cannot be ignored. Sailors on merchant vessels, port workers, and emergency crews in Fujairah faced immediate danger. Rescue services tended to fires on ships and at the shore facility. International humanitarian organizations warned of the collateral harm that would accrue if the fighting expanded around civilian infrastructure. There are inevitably legal and strategic questions about Project Freedom. Under international law, freedom of navigation is a cornerstone of maritime order, yet the legality of unilateral military measures is contentious, especially where a party claims defensive measures within its own coastal waters. The U.S. is framing its actions as protective of international law. Iran calls them coercive and imperial. Those competing narratives will matter in the UN Security Council, in capital-to-capital diplomacy, and in the court of public opinion. As the day wore on, global markets and diplomatic channels reacted. The United Nations called for restraint and offered to convene talks. Some European partners urged de-escalation and made clear they were not prepared to join a combat operation. Regional players, including Oman, which borders the Strait, sought to mediate quietly even as their own waters became the locus for enhanced security measures. There are also domestic consequences for the nations involved. In Iran, the leadership has depicted the confrontation as a defense of national dignity and deterrence. In the United States, the president's decision to use military assets for a humanitarian framing of navigation rights has galvanized both political supporters and critics. Congressional leaders and legal scholars will parse the administration's authority for these actions in the days to come. For mariners and businesses, what matters now is practical. Will the safe passage promised by U.S. Will the safe passage promised by U.S. forces hold long enough to clear the backlog of vessels? Will insurers lower premiums and carriers resume reliable schedules? Will the U.S. and its partners be able to keep an operational corridor open without further violent reprisals? Those questions have immediate commercial answers and broader strategic ones. In the hours ahead, expect continued patrols, more official briefings from U.S. Central Command, and a new round of diplomatic outreach. The Pentagon will publish updates on intercepted threats and the status of escorted transit. The UAE and other affected states will continue to release statements about damage and countermeasures. International oil markets will remain jittery until a sustained pattern of safe commercial transit is visible and verifiable. This moment illustrates the narrow margin between limited tactical operations and wider conflict. A humanitarian framing, in this case, intersects directly with hard power. When naval forces escort civilian ships through contested waters, each missile, each drone, each small boat represents a potential spark. Those sparks can be contained, but only if political leaders on all sides choose restraint and open channels for talks, and only if those talks are backed by credible incentives and verifiable steps. In the meantime, crews and their families wait for clarity. Shippers weigh risk against revenue. Diplomats convene in emergency calls. And VAL officers on the decks of guided missile destroyers scan the horizon, tasked with a mission that mixes protection, deterrence, and the constant hope that measured force can create space for negotiation rather than simply expand the fighting. We'll continue to follow developments through the day, documenting official briefings, on-the-scene reports from the Gulf, and statements from capitals around the world. For now, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel that has shaped global trade for generations, is again a flashpoint where military posture, economic pressure, and diplomatic maneuvering converge. The question that will define the coming days is whether Project Freedom can deliver safe, orderly transit without touching off the very escalation it seeks to prevent.